Billionaire CEO's twin sons drown in pool. His ex-wife is the only trauma surgeon who can save them. The call came at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, shattering Daniel Cross's board meeting and every assumption he had about what mattered in life. He was presenting quarterly projections to Cross Industries' board of directors when his phone buzzed with an urgency that made his blood run cold. "Mr. Cross, there's been an accident." The voice trembled through the speaker. "The twins, sir. Marcus and Michael. They're not breathing." The room around Daniel seemed to tilt and spin as the words registered. His 6-year-old sons. His beautiful, energetic boys who had been playing by the pool at his estate while he conducted business as usual. The phone slipped from his numb fingers as 23 board members stared at him in concern. "Sir, we're performing CPR now, but you need to get to Children's Hospital immediately. They're being airlifted there as we speak." Have you ever received the phone call that stops your world? Have you ever had to face losing the most precious things in your life because of choices you made? Tonight, you'll witness a billionaire father's worst nightmare. His 6-year-old twin sons fighting for their lives after a drowning accident, and the only surgeon who can save them is the ex-wife he destroyed in court. But here's the impossible question. Can a woman find the strength to save the children of the man who took them from her? And can love heal wounds that seemed permanent? If you believe that crisis can reveal who we really are, and that forgiveness is the ultimate act of love, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story will change everything you think you know about family, forgiveness, and what makes a good parent. Daniel Cross had built an empire worth $3.2 billion, but sitting in the back of his limousine racing toward Children's Hospital, he would have traded every penny to turn back time 20 minutes. 20 minutes ago, his biggest concern had been a 3% dip in quarterly revenues. Now, his entire world hung in the balance of 2 small heartbeats that might already have stopped forever. 5 years earlier, Daniel Cross had been ambitious but not yet ruthless when he first met Dr. Elena Rodriguez during her surgical residency at Johns Hopkins. She was in her 3rd year of training, working 18-hour shifts and surviving on coffee and determination, when Daniel had been brought to the emergency room after a car accident. "You're very lucky," Elena had said, examining the x-rays of his fractured ribs. "A few inches to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation." "Lucky seems relative when you can barely breathe," Daniel had replied, trying to make her smile despite the pain medication making him groggy. "Pain means you're alive," Elena had said matter-of-factly, but her dark eyes had been kind. "And alive means you get to complain about it, which is actually a gift." Daniel had been struck not just by her beauty, but by her competence. The way she moved through the trauma bay with absolute confidence, her hands steady as she sutured his wounds, her voice calm as she explained procedures to worried family members. She was 26 years old and already seemed to possess the wisdom of someone who had seen life and death dance together countless times. "What kind of doctor are you going to be?" Daniel had asked as Elena finished bandaging his ribs. "Pediatric trauma surgeon," Elena had replied without hesitation. "Children deserve doctors who won't give up on them, no matter how impossible the case seems." "That sounds like the most heartbreaking job in the world," Daniel had observed. "It's also the most rewarding," Elena had said softly. "When you save a child's life, you save their entire future. Every birthday, every graduation, every moment of joy they'll ever experience. There's no feeling like giving a family their miracle." Daniel had asked her to dinner before he was discharged, and somehow, despite her impossible schedule, Elena had said yes. Their courtship had been unconventional, built around Elena's grueling residency schedule and Daniel's rapidly expanding tech company. Dinner dates at 2 a.m. between her shifts. Phone conversations during his business trips. Text messages sent during brief breaks in surgery that said nothing more than "thinking of you," but meant everything. "I don't know how you do it," Daniel had said one evening as he picked Elena up after a particularly difficult day in pediatric surgery. She looked exhausted and emotionally drained, her scrubs wrinkled from 16 hours of trying to save children's lives. "Some days I don't know either," Elena had admitted, leaning against his shoulder as they sat in his car outside the hospital. "Today we lost a 7-year-old. Car accident. I worked on him for 4 hours, and I couldn't save him." Daniel had held her while she cried, understanding for the first time the weight she carried. Every child she couldn't save became a personal failure, a life she couldn't give back to devastated parents. Why do you keep doing it? Daniel had asked gently. Why put yourself through this kind of pain? Because for every child I can't save, there are 3 I can, Elena had replied, wiping her tears and straightening her shoulders. And those 3 children get to grow up and have families and change the world. That's worth every heartbreak. Daniel had proposed 6 months later, on the night Elena passed her surgical boards and officially became Dr. Elena Rodriguez. He had been waiting in her apartment with champagne and a ring when she came home, exhausted but triumphant. Elena Rodriguez, he had said, dropping to one knee in her tiny kitchen, you save lives every day, but you saved mine the moment we met. Will you marry me? Elena's yes had been immediate and tearful, followed by laughter and kisses that tasted like possibility and forever. Their wedding had been small but perfect, held in the hospital chapel where Elena worked. Her colleagues had filled the pews, celebrating not just a marriage but the union of 2 people who shared a commitment to making the world better. Daniel in his black tuxedo, Elena in a simple white dress that she could afford on a resident's salary, both of them glowing with happiness. I promise to support your dreams, even when they take you away from me, Daniel had vowed during their ceremony. I promise to understand that your work saves lives and that the world needs doctors like you. I promise to balance my career with our love, Elena had replied. I promise that no matter how demanding my work becomes, you and our family will always be my first priority. For 2 years, they had managed to keep those promises. Daniel's company, Cross Industries, had grown exponentially, while Elena had completed her residency and begun her fellowship in pediatric trauma surgery. They had worked different schedules and lived in different worlds, but their love had bridged every gap. The twins had arrived on a snowy February morning when Elena was 29 and Daniel was 31. Marcus had been born first, screaming with impressive lung capacity, followed 3 minutes later by Michael, who had emerged quietly observing the world with serious dark eyes just like his mother's. They're perfect, Daniel had whispered, holding Marcus while Elena cradled Michael. Absolutely perfect. Marcus has your stubborn chin, Elena had laughed through happy tears. And Michael has your thinking expression. They're going to be brilliant, Daniel had said with absolute certainty. With your compassion and my determination, they'll be able to change the world. As long as they're happy and loved, that's all that matters, Elena had replied, her voice soft with exhaustion and joy. The early years with the twins had been magical despite the chaos. Elena had taken a brief maternity leave, then returned to work with a reduced surgery schedule that allowed her to be home more often. Daniel had been building Cross Industries into a major player in the tech industry, but he had made time for bedtime stories and weekend adventures. We have everything, Daniel had said one evening as they watched 3-year-old Marcus and Michael playing in their backyard while the sun set behind them. Successful careers, beautiful children, and each other. What more could we possibly need? Nothing, Elena had agreed, leaning against his shoulder. We have everything that matters. But somewhere along the way, having everything had stopped being enough for both of them. The cracks had started small. Elena's surgery schedule becoming more demanding as she gained reputation as one of the best pediatric trauma surgeons on the East Coast. Daniel's company expanding internationally, requiring more travel and longer hours. Both parents missing more bedtime stories, more school events, more precious moments with Marcus and Michael. I need you to scale back your surgery schedule, Daniel had said one evening after missing the twins' 4th birthday party because of a merger meeting that ran late. The boys need their mother home more often. They need their father home more often too, Elena had replied, exhaustion evident in her voice. When was the last time you read them a bedtime story? When did you last help with homework or just play with them in the backyard? I'm building their future, Daniel had insisted. Cross Industries will provide security for generations. Everything I do is for this family. Everything you do is for your ego, Elena had said quietly. The boys don't need a trust fund, Daniel. They need parents who are present and engaged. And you think spending 60 hours a week in surgery makes you present and engaged? Daniel had shot back. Half the time when I call home, the nanny answers because you're at the hospital. I save children's lives, Elena had replied, her voice rising. I give families their miracles. That work matters, Daniel. Our family matters too, Daniel had said. Or it should. The arguments had escalated from there. Both parents driven, both successful, both convinced that their work was more important than compromise. Elena saw Daniel as obsessed with building wealth at the expense of family connection. Daniel saw Elena as choosing her career over their children's needs. You missed Marcus's soccer game again, Daniel had said after Elena had been called in for an emergency surgery on a Saturday afternoon. He scored his first goal, and his mother wasn't there to see it. I was saving a 9-year-old's life, Elena had replied, her scrub still stained with the evidence of her work. Her parents get to tuck her in tonight because I missed a soccer game. What about our children? Daniel had demanded. What about Marcus and Michael? Don't they deserve a mother who's present for their lives? They have a mother who's present, Elena had said firmly. Just because I work doesn't mean I love them less or care for them less. It means you're not here when they need you, Daniel had countered. It means other people are raising our children while you're at the hospital. Other people help with child care, they don't raise our children, Elena had said, her voice dangerously quiet. And Daniel, you travel 3 weeks out of every month. How is that different from my surgery schedule? Because I'm building something that will last, Daniel had replied. I'm creating generational wealth that will benefit Marcus and Michael forever. I'm saving lives, Elena had said simply, including children just like Marcus and Michael. How is that less important than making money? The final break had come when the twins were 5 years old. Elena had been offered the position of chief of pediatric trauma surgery at Children's Hospital, the youngest doctor ever considered for the role. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for, the chance to save even more children and train the next generation of pediatric surgeons. I can't take the position, Elena had told Daniel after a week of agonizing over the decision. The schedule would be even more demanding, and you're right that the boys need more stability at home. What if you took the position and we hired additional help? Daniel had suggested, though his tone had been reluctant. Full-time nannies, housekeepers, whatever we need. You want me to take a job that requires me to work even more hours and then hire other people to raise our children? Elena had asked in disbelief. I want you to be realistic about what kind of mother you can be while pursuing this level of career success, Daniel had said, the words cutting deep. Elena, you're brilliant and talented, but you can't have everything. Something has to give. Are you asking me to choose between my children and my career? Elena had asked quietly. I'm asking you to choose what's most important to you, Daniel had replied. Because right now, it seems like the hospital always wins. Elena had stared at him, seeing not the man who had once supported her dreams, but someone who had decided that her work was incompatible with motherhood. I'll take the position, she had said finally, and we'll make it work. No, Daniel had said firmly. We won't. Elena, if you take that job, I'll file for divorce and primary custody. I won't watch our children grow up, raised by nannies while their mother saves other people's kids. You're threatening me, Elena had asked, her voice barely a whisper. I'm protecting our children, Daniel had replied, though something in his eyes had suggested he knew he was crossing a line he could never uncross. Elena had taken the position anyway. Daniel had filed for divorce the next week. The custody battle that followed had been brutal and public, two successful parents fighting over the children they both loved desperately. But Daniel had resources Elena couldn't match, and he had used every advantage to paint her as an absent mother whose career came before her children. Dr. Rodriguez, Daniel's attorney, had said during Elena's deposition, "Isn't it true that you regularly work 60 to 70 hours per week?" "I work the hours necessary to save children's lives," Elena had replied, her own lawyer's hand on her arm in warning. "And during those 60 to 70 hours, who cares for Marcus and Michael? We employ qualified childcare professionals, and my husband is often available," Elena had said carefully. "But you're not available, are you? You're at the hospital, operating on other people's children while strangers care for your own." Elena's lawyer had objected, but the damage was done. Every long surgery was twisted into evidence of neglect. Every life she saved was portrayed as time stolen from Marcus and Michael. Her dedication to helping children was weaponized against her motherhood. "Mrs. Cross," the opposing counsel had continued, "how many of Marcus's soccer games have you attended this season?" 3 out of 8, Elena had admitted quietly. And Michael's school plays? I missed the fall play due to an emergency surgery, but I attended the spring performance. Emergency surgery. How often do these emergencies occur? Trauma doesn't schedule itself, Elena had said, frustration creeping into her voice. When a child is dying, I can't tell the parents I need to leave for a soccer game. But you can tell your own children that other families' emergencies matter more than their milestones. Elena had felt the trap closing around her, every answer twisted to support the narrative that she was a selfish mother who chose her career over her children. The court's decision had been devastating, but not surprising. Primary custody to Daniel, with Elena granted visitation every other weekend and alternating holidays. The judge had cited the instability of Elena's schedule and her demonstrated pattern of prioritizing professional obligations over parental responsibilities. Furthermore, the judge had continued, while Dr. Rodriguez's work is admirable, the court finds that Mr. Cross can provide a more consistent home environment for the minor children. Elena had sat in the courtroom, numb with disbelief, as her life was legally rearranged. She would go from being a full-time mother to a part-time visitor in her own children's lives. Marcus and Michael would live with their father while she became the parent they saw on weekends, if her surgery schedule allowed. This is temporary, Elena's attorney had whispered to her as they left the courthouse. We can appeal, we can petition for modification as circumstances change. But Elena had known the truth. Daniel had won completely and permanently. He had the children, the house, the family life, while she had her career and an empty apartment and the crushing weight of a choice she had never wanted to make. That evening, Elena had sat in her new apartment, surrounded by moving boxes and the silence of a home without children's laughter. On her kitchen table lay the court documents that had legally separated her from Marcus and Michael, and on her phone were 17 missed calls from the hospital about a 6-year-old who needed emergency surgery. She had gone to the hospital. She had saved the 6-year-old's life. But driving home afterward, Elena had wondered if Daniel had been right all along. Maybe she was the kind of woman who would always choose surgery over soccer games, operating rooms over playgrounds, other people's children over her own. 3 years later, Dr. Elena Cross, she had kept Daniel's name out of some misguided hope for reconciliation, had become one of the most respected pediatric trauma surgeons in the country. She had saved hundreds of children's lives, trained dozens of young doctors, and built a reputation that brought families from around the world to Children's Hospital. She had also missed 3 years of bedtime stories, school plays, soccer games, and the 1,000 small moments that made up her son's daily lives. Marcus and Michael visited her every other weekend, polite and loving but increasingly distant, their lives centered around their father's world rather than hers. How was school this week? Elena would ask during their brief visits. Good, Marcus would reply, though she knew from Daniel's emails that he had won the science fair and been selected for the advanced reading program. Did you have fun at soccer practice? She would ask Michael. Yes, he would answer, not mentioning that he had been moved up to the competitive team or that he was now the best player in his age group. Elena learned about her son's lives through secondhand reports and carefully edited updates, watching them grow up from the periphery while other people celebrated their achievements and comforted their disappointments. They're doing well, Daniel would say during their terse exchanges when he picked up the boys after weekend visits. Marcus is reading at a 5th grade level, and Michael scored 4 goals in his last game. That's wonderful, Elena would reply, her heart breaking at learning about her children's lives like an interested observer rather than an involved parent. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days fighting to give other families their miracles, to save other children's lives, while her own children grew up without her. Every life she saved in the operating room was a life she couldn't save in her own family. Dr. Cross, her surgical resident, had said one evening after a particularly difficult case, "Do you ever regret choosing surgery? Do you ever wish you had picked something with more regular hours?" Elena had considered the question as she scrubbed out after a 12-hour operation that had saved an 8-year-old's life. "Regret is a luxury that pediatric surgeons can't afford," she had replied. "Every child I save gets to go home to their family. That has to be enough." But as Elena drove home to her empty apartment, she had wondered if it really was enough. If saving other people's children could ever compensate for losing daily access to her own. Now, standing in the trauma bay of Children's Hospital, staring at two small forms on gurneys surrounded by medical equipment, Elena Cross faced the most impossible moment of her career. Marcus and Michael lay unconscious, their faces pale and still, machines breathing for them while her colleagues worked frantically to stabilize their condition. "Dr. Cross," the emergency room physician said gently, "I'm so sorry. We got the call about the drowning, and when we saw the names." Elena approached her son's bedside with the clinical detachment that had served her through thousands of difficult cases, but underneath her professional composure, her heart was screaming. Marcus, her serious little boy who loved science and asked thoughtful questions about everything, lay motionless with a breathing tube down his throat. Michael, her energetic soccer player who could make anyone laugh, was connected to machines that were keeping his damaged brain alive. "What's their status?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Severe hypoxic brain injury secondary to near drowning," the resident reported. They were underwater for approximately 4 to 6 minutes before being pulled out. CPR was initiated immediately, but both boys were in full cardiac arrest when paramedics arrived. 4 to 6 minutes. Elena knew exactly what that meant. At room temperature, brain cells began dying after 3 to 4 minutes without oxygen. Her sons had been without breath, without heartbeat, for long enough to cause potentially devastating brain damage. "Current neurological status?" Elena asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Both boys are unresponsive. Pupils are reactive but sluggish. CT scans show significant cerebral edema. We've induced therapeutic hypothermia to minimize further brain damage. But Elena..." The resident paused, struggling with the personal nature of the case. "The next 24 hours are critical. They're going to need surgery to relieve the brain pressure, and even then, we don't know if they'll wake up," Elena finished quietly, "or what kind of function they'll have if they do." She stood between her son's gurneys, these two children who had been her greatest joy and her deepest loss, now fighting for their lives in her own hospital. As she watched the monitors tracking their vital signs, Elena felt the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. Marcus and Michael needed surgery. Complex, delicate procedures to drain fluid from their swollen brains and relieve the pressure that could kill them or leave them permanently damaged. At Children's Hospital, there was only one surgeon with the expertise and experience to perform such operations on children this young. Elena Cross, the mother who had lost them in court, was now the only person who could save their lives. If you've ever faced an impossible choice between personal pain and professional duty, between what hurts you and what's right, hit that like button now, because this story is about to show you what real strength looks like. The trauma bay doors burst open, and Daniel Cross rushed in, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face pale with terror. He looked around frantically until his eyes found Marcus and Michael, then seemed to crumple at the sight of his sons unconscious and connected to life support machines. "How are they?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking as he approached the gurneys. "Are they going to be okay?" Elena looked at the man who had destroyed her family, who had taken her children and painted her as an unfit mother, who was now facing the possibility of losing the sons he had fought so hard to keep. Despite everything between them, Elena felt his pain as if it were her own. "They're alive," Elena said simply. "But Daniel, they need surgery. Immediately. The brain swelling is severe, and if we don't relieve the pressure soon." "Then do it," Daniel said immediately. "Whatever they need, whatever it costs, just save them." Elena was quiet for a moment, the irony of the situation overwhelming. "Daniel, I'm the surgeon who would need to perform the operation. I'm the only one at this hospital with the specialized training for this type of pediatric neurosurgery." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. The woman he had portrayed as an absent mother was now the only person who could save his children's lives. The wife he had divorced for choosing her career over family was being asked to use that same career to give him back his sons. Daniel stared at Elena, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're saying that you're the only one who can save Marcus and Michael?" "I'm saying that I'm their best chance," Elena replied carefully. "There are other surgeons who could attempt the procedure, but the success rates." "I need you to save them," Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper. "Elena, I need you to save our sons." The word "our" hit Elena like a physical blow. For 3 years, Marcus and Michael had been his sons in every legal and practical sense. She had been relegated to the role of weekend visitor, special occasion parent, the mother who sent birthday presents and Christmas gifts but wasn't part of their daily lives. Now, faced with potentially losing them forever, Daniel was remembering that they were her sons too. A mother doesn't abandon her children, Elena said quietly, her hands already reaching for Marcus's chart, even when their father convinced the world that she already had. As Elena began reviewing her son's medical files, preparing for the most important surgery of her career, she pushed aside 3 years of hurt and resentment. There would be time later to process the irony, to confront the man who had taken her children and then begged her to save them. Right now, Marcus and Michael needed their mother. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena Cross was exactly where her children needed her to be. In the operating room, fighting for their lives with her own skilled hands, proving once and for all that love couldn't be measured in hours clocked or custody arrangements, but in the lengths a mother would go to save her babies. The surgery that would determine whether Marcus and Michael lived or died was about to begin, and their mother was finally coming home. This story has established the devastating custody battle, the drowning accident, and the impossible situation where Elena must save the children who were taken from her. The following part will cover the life-saving surgery, the twins' recovery, and the family's journey toward healing and redemption. Elena Cross stood outside operating room 3, her hands steady as she scrubbed for the most important surgery of her career. Through the observation window, she could see the surgical team preparing for what would either be a miracle or a tragedy. 2 small forms lay on adjacent operating tables, Marcus and Michael surrounded by the complex machinery that would monitor their lives minute by minute for the next several hours. "Dr. Cross," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the anesthesiologist who had worked with Elena for 5 years. "Are you certain you want to proceed? Operating on your own children. The emotional stress could compromise your judgment." Elena looked at her colleague, a woman who had seen her perform miracles on hundreds of children, but had never seen her as anything other than completely professional and controlled. "Jennifer, 3 years ago I was told that I couldn't be both a surgeon and a good mother," Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Today, I'm going to save my children's lives with the skills I developed during all those hours I was supposedly abandoning them. Tell me again how my career made me a bad mother." Dr. Walsh nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind Elena's words. "The surgical team is ready when you are. Dr. Rodriguez will be operating on Michael while you handle Marcus. We've coordinated the procedures to run simultaneously." Elena took a deep breath, centering herself in the calm professionalism that had carried her through thousands of life-or-death decisions. But as she pushed through the doors, she allowed herself one moment of pure maternal terror. She was about to operate on her own children. If she failed, if her hands weren't steady enough or her judgment wasn't perfect enough, Marcus and Michael would die. The boys she had carried for 9 months, nursed as babies, loved every moment of their lives even when the court said she couldn't be part of those lives, would be gone forever. "Dr. Cross," the surgical nurse said gently, "we're ready to begin." Elena approached Marcus's table, looking down at her 6-year-old son's pale face. Even unconscious and connected to breathing tubes, he looked like the serious, thoughtful boy she remembered. The child who asked endless questions about how things worked, who wanted to understand the science behind everything he encountered. "Hello, sweetheart," Elena whispered, her voice so low that only Marcus could hear. "Mommy's here. Mommy's going to fix this, and you're going to be okay. Both of you are going to be okay." She placed her gloved hand gently on Marcus's forehead, feeling the warmth of his skin through the latex. For just a moment, she wasn't Dr. Elena Cross, renowned pediatric trauma surgeon. She was just a mother who would do anything to save her child. Beginning craniotomy procedure, Elena announced to the surgical team, her voice now completely professional. Patient is 6-year-old male with severe cerebral edema secondary to hypoxic brain injury. Goal is to relieve intracranial pressure and restore normal blood flow to affected brain regions. The next hour passed in a blur of precise movements and critical decisions. Elena made the initial incision in Marcus's scalp, her hands moving with the muscle memory of thousands of similar procedures. But this wasn't just another surgery. Every cut she made was in her own son's flesh. Every decision she faced could determine whether Marcus would grow up to be the scientist she knew he wanted to become, or whether he would survive at all. Pressure readings are still elevated, reported the surgical nurse monitoring Marcus's vitals. ICP is at 25 and climbing. Increase the mannitol drip, Elena ordered, her eyes never leaving the surgical field. She was working to create a small opening in Marcus's skull that would allow the swollen brain tissue to expand without being compressed against bone. It was delicate work that required absolute precision. Too little pressure relief, and Marcus could suffer permanent brain damage. Too much, and she could cause catastrophic bleeding. Dr. Cross. Dr. Walsh's voice carried a note of concern. Marcus's blood pressure is dropping. We may be looking at cardiac complications from the prolonged hypoxia. Elena's hands never paused in their work, but her heart skipped a beat. During the drowning, Marcus's brain hadn't been the only organ deprived of oxygen. His heart, kidneys, and other vital organs had also suffered damage that might not become apparent until he was under the stress of surgery. Push dopamine and increase the fluid resuscitation, Elena ordered. And get cardiology on standby. If we need to open his chest, I want the team ready. From the adjacent operating table, she could hear Dr. Rodriguez providing similar orders for Michael's surgery. Both twins were fighting for their lives simultaneously, their small bodies struggling to survive the catastrophic damage caused by those terrible minutes underwater. Elena continued working, creating the bone flap that would give Marcus's brain room to swell without causing fatal compression. As she worked, her mind flashed to memories of her son's short life. Marcus taking his first steps while she cheered from across the room. Marcus asking why the sky was blue and listening intently to her explanation about light wavelengths and atmospheric scattering. Marcus hugging her goodbye after their last weekend visit, not knowing it might be the last time he was conscious to do so. ICP is coming down, the nurse reported. 22 and dropping. Good, Elena said, though she didn't allow herself to feel relief yet. The pressure reduction was encouraging, but Marcus still had hours of surgery ahead of him. And even if the operation was successful, there were no guarantees about what kind of neurological function he would retain. Dr. Cross, Dr. Rodriguez called from Michael's table. We're seeing some irregular brain activity on the EEG. Could be seizure activity starting. Elena looked over at her other son, seeing the controlled chaos of medical professionals fighting to save a child's life. Michael lay motionless on his surgical table, his chest rising and falling only because machines were breathing for him. The little boy who could make anyone laugh with his silly faces and boundless energy was fighting a battle that would determine whether he would ever smile again. Start anticonvulsants, Elena called back. If he's seizing, we need to stop it before it causes additional brain damage. Already started, Dr. Rodriguez replied. But Elena, his brain scan shows more extensive damage than Marcus's. The hypoxia may have affected his motor cortex more severely. Elena felt her chest tighten at the implication. Even if Michael survived, he might face permanent physical disabilities. The active, athletic boy who lived for soccer and running and climbing might spend the rest of his life unable to control his own movements. But Elena pushed those thoughts aside. Right now, her job was to save both her sons' lives. Everything else could be dealt with later. Continuing with dural opening, Elena announced, beginning the most delicate part of Marcus's surgery. She was now working directly on the membrane covering his brain, creating space for the swollen tissue while being careful not to damage the delicate neural structures underneath. As she worked, Elena became aware of movement in the observation gallery above the operating room. Through the glass, she could see Daniel standing with his hands pressed against the window, watching every movement of the surgical team. He had been there for 2 hours, never moving, never sitting, just staring down at his sons with an expression of absolute helplessness. For a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life through wealth and influence, watching his children fight for their lives while being unable to help must be unbearable. Elena almost felt sorry for him, despite everything he had done to their family. Dr. Cross, the perfusion specialist, called out, "We're seeing improved blood flow to the affected brain regions. The pressure relief appears to be working." "Excellent," Elena replied, allowing herself a small moment of hope. Marcus's brain was responding to the surgery, which meant there was a chance he would survive with minimal long-term damage. How much longer? Daniel's voice came through the intercom system connecting the observation gallery to the operating room. Elena looked up at him through the glass. At least 3 more hours for both boys, she said. We're past the most critical phase, but there's still a lot of work to do. Are they going to be okay? Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. Elena considered how to answer. The truth was that she didn't know. Surgery could only repair so much of the damage caused by prolonged oxygen deprivation. Even if both boys survived, they might face cognitive disabilities, physical impairments, or personality changes that would affect them for the rest of their lives. They're fighters, Elena said finally. They're strong boys, and they're fighting hard. It wasn't a medical prognosis, but it was all the hope she could offer. 3 hours later, Elena stepped back from Marcus's table, her part of the surgery finally complete. The bone flap had been replaced, the incisions closed, and Marcus's brain pressure had stabilized at normal levels. His vital signs were stronger than they had been since the accident, and his responses to neurological testing were encouraging. Excellent work, Dr. Walsh said as the anesthesia team prepared to transport Marcus to the pediatric intensive care unit. His brain function looks remarkably good considering the severity of the initial injury. Elena nodded, though she knew the real test would come when Marcus woke up. Surgery could only repair the damage that was surgically accessible. The microscopic cellular damage caused by oxygen deprivation would reveal itself over the coming days and weeks as Marcus either recovered his normal function or demonstrated the limitations that hypoxic brain injury could cause. Dr. Rodriguez was still working on Michael, whose surgery had proven more complicated than initially expected. The damage to his brain had been more extensive, requiring more aggressive intervention to save his life. How is he doing? Elena asked, moving to observe Michael's procedure. Better than I hoped, Dr. Rodriguez replied, not looking up from his work. The motor cortex damage is significant, but we've been able to restore blood flow to most of the affected areas. He's going to have a long recovery, and there will likely be some permanent deficits, but Elena, he's going to live. Elena felt tears threaten for the first time since the surgery began. Both her sons were going to survive. There would be challenges ahead, weeks or months of rehabilitation and therapy, but Marcus and Michael would have the chance to grow up, to recover, to become the amazing young men she knew they could be. Dr. Cross, a nurse approached her as she watched Michael's surgery continue. Mr. Cross is asking to speak with you. He's in the family conference room. Elena looked toward the observation gallery, where Daniel was no longer standing. After watching his sons fight for their lives for 6 hours, he wanted to talk. Elena could imagine what he might say. Gratitude for saving the boys' lives, perhaps. Questions about their prognosis and recovery timeline. Maybe even an acknowledgement that her surgical skills had given his children their future. Tell him I'll be there once Michael's surgery is complete, Elena said. I want to see both boys safely to the ICU before I talk to anyone. It was another hour before Michael's surgery concluded successfully. Elena watched as both her sons were wheeled to the pediatric intensive care unit, surrounded by the complex monitoring equipment that would track their recovery minute by minute for the next several days. In the PICU, Marcus and Michael lay side by side in adjoining beds, their heads wrapped in surgical bandages, their small faces pale but peaceful. Elena stood between their beds, one hand resting gently on each boy's arm, feeling the steady pulse that meant life, that meant hope, that meant she had succeeded in giving them back their future. They look so small, said a voice behind her. Elena turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway of the PICU, his expensive suit replaced with hospital scrubs, and his face showing the exhaustion of a man who had aged years in a single day. They are small, Elena replied. 6-year-old children are always small when they're fighting for their lives. Daniel approached slowly, as if afraid he might disturb his son's fragile peace. When he reached their bedside, he looked down at Marcus and Michael with an expression Elena had never seen before. Complete vulnerability, unconditional love, and the devastating realization of how close he had come to losing everything that mattered. Will they be okay? Daniel asked quietly. Really okay, not just medical optimism. Elena considered her response carefully. Marcus's prognosis is very good. The surgery went smoothly, and his brain responded well to the pressure relief. I expect him to make a complete recovery, though there may be some temporary challenges with memory and concentration. And Michael? Elena's expression grew more serious. Michael's injuries were more severe. He's going to live, and he's going to be himself. But Daniel, there may be some permanent physical limitations. Fine motor skills, possibly some weakness on his left side. We won't know the full extent until he wakes up, and we can do comprehensive neurological testing. Daniel absorbed this information, his face cycling through relief, gratitude, and grief for what Michael might have lost forever. Elena, Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly, I need to thank you. I need to apologize. I need to say things that I should have said 3 years ago. Daniel, this isn't the time, Elena said softly. The boys need our focus right now. The boys need their mother, Daniel said firmly. They've always needed their mother, and I was too blind and too selfish to see it. Elena looked at him sharply, surprised by the admission. I watched you in that operating room for 6 hours, Daniel continued. I watched you save our children's lives with skills you developed during all those hours I accused you of abandoning them. Elena, you weren't abandoning Marcus and Michael when you were at the hospital. You were becoming the person who could save them when they needed it most. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she maintained her composure. I was doing my job. No, Daniel said firmly. You were being their mother. The kind of mother who develops the skills to save their lives when no one else can. The kind of mother who puts their needs before her own pain. Even when their father has spent 3 years trying to convince the world that she doesn't deserve them. Daniel, I destroyed our family, Daniel interrupted, his voice full of anguish. I took our children from the mother who loved them and convinced myself I was protecting them. But Elena, watching you today, seeing what you're capable of, understanding what your work really means, I realized that I didn't just rob you of time with Marcus and Michael. I robbed them of time with you. Elena looked down at her sleeping sons, processing Daniel's words. For 3 years, she had carried the guilt of the custody battle, wondering if she really was the kind of mother who chose her career over her children. Hearing Daniel acknowledge that he had been wrong was validating, but it couldn't give her back the years she had lost. The damage is done, Daniel, Elena said quietly. I missed 3 years of their lives. 3 years of bedtime stories and soccer games and school plays. 3 years of being their full-time mother instead of their weekend visitor. Then let's make sure you don't miss any more, Daniel said, his voice full of determination. Elena, I want to modify the custody arrangement. I want joint custody, real joint custody where the boys spend equal time with both parents. Elena stared at him in shock. What are you saying? I'm saying I was wrong about everything, Daniel replied. Wrong about what makes a good parent, wrong about your priorities, wrong about what our children need. Marcus and Michael need both of us, Elena. They need their brilliant surgeon mother and their business executive father. They need the parent who saves lives and the parent who builds companies. They need balance, not the artificial choice I forced on our family. Elena felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Daniel, you can't just change your mind because I saved their lives. This isn't gratitude talking. Custody arrangements affect children's entire futures. This isn't gratitude, Daniel said firmly. This is clarity. Elena, I spent 3 years convinced that my way of parenting was better than yours. I thought providing financial security and consistent schedules was more important than the work you do. But watching our sons nearly die today, and watching you save them, I understand something I should have seen years ago. What's that? That love isn't measured in hours clocked or schedules maintained, Daniel said softly. Love is measured in the lengths you'll go to for your children. And Elena, there's no one in the world who would go further for Marcus and Michael than you would. Elena felt tears finally spilling down her cheeks. You destroyed me in court. You painted me as an absent mother who cared more about her career than her children. The judge believed you. Everyone believed you. Because I made it easy to believe, Daniel admitted. I hired the best lawyers and investigators. I documented every missed soccer game and every late night at the hospital. I turned your dedication to saving children's lives into evidence of maternal neglect. Elena, I used your compassion against you. What? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why did you want to hurt me that badly? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, looking down at their sleeping children. Because I was terrified, he said finally. Terrified that you were becoming more successful than me. Terrified that your work was more important than mine. Terrified that you might realize you and the boys could have a better life without me. So you made sure we couldn't have any life without you, Elena said, understanding flooding through her. I convinced myself I was protecting the boys from an unstable home life, Daniel continued. But really, I was protecting myself from losing control. I couldn't control your surgery schedule or your dedication to your patients, so I used the legal system to control everything else. Elena absorbed this confession, years of hurt and confusion finally making sense. You made me choose between my children and my career, then used my choice against me. Yes, Daniel said simply, and I've regretted it every day since. If you believe that admitting our mistakes is the first step toward healing, and that some apologies can change everything, comment below and let us know about a time when someone's honest acknowledgement of their wrongs made a difference in your life. Elena looked at Marcus and Michael, still unconscious but stable, their small chests rising and falling with the steady rhythm of healing. These boys had almost died today, and their survival was due to her surgical skills, the very skills Daniel had used to argue she was an unfit mother. The boys are going to need both of us during their recovery, Elena said finally. Especially Michael. He's going to face months of physical therapy and rehabilitation. They'll need stability and support from both parents. They'll have it, Daniel promised. Elena, I want to do this right. Not just the custody arrangement, but all of it. Co-parenting as partners instead of adversaries. Supporting each other instead of fighting each other. Giving Marcus and Michael the family they deserve. That's going to require major changes, Elena warned. For both of us. I can't keep working 70-hour weeks if I'm going to be an equal parent, and you can't keep traveling 3 weeks out of every month. Then we both need to restructure our lives around our children, Daniel said without hesitation. Elena, I almost lost them today. I almost lost everything that matters because I was too focused on things that don't matter at all. I won't make that mistake again. Elena reached out to touch Marcus's hand, feeling the warmth of his skin and the steady pulse beneath her fingers. They're going to wake up asking questions. They're going to want to know what happened, why they're in the hospital, why both parents are here together. What do we tell them? Daniel asked. We tell them the truth, Elena said firmly. We tell them they had an accident, but they're going to be okay. We tell them that mommy and daddy are going to take care of them together. And we tell them that sometimes scary things happen, but families get stronger when they face challenges together. Are we going to be a family again? Daniel asked quietly. Elena looked at him. This man who had been her greatest love and her deepest pain, who had given her the most precious gifts of her life, and then taken them away. We're always going to be a family, Daniel. The question is what kind of family we choose to be. I want us to be the kind of family that puts love before pride, Daniel said. The kind that supports each other's dreams instead of competing with them. The kind where both parents are present and engaged and working together for their children's happiness. That sounds like what we should have been all along, Elena replied softly. Then let's start now, Daniel said. Let's start with tonight, sitting with our sons and being here when they wake up. Let's start with tomorrow, figuring out how to restructure our lives around their needs. Let's start with next week, meeting with lawyers to create a custody arrangement that actually serves their best interests instead of our egos. Elena nodded, feeling something loosening in her chest that had been tight for 3 years. Okay, we start now. As if responding to their parents' conversation, Marcus stirred slightly in his bed, his eyelids fluttering as consciousness began to return. Marcus, Elena said softly, leaning closer to her son. Sweetheart, can you hear me? Marcus's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. He looked around the PICU with the disorientation of someone emerging from anesthesia, then his gaze found Elena's face. Mommy, Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. Where am I? You're in the hospital, sweetheart, Elena said, tears of relief flowing freely now. You had an accident, but you're okay. You're going to be fine. My head hurts, Marcus said, reaching up to touch the bandages wrapped around his skull. I know it does, Elena said gently. But the doctors fixed you up, and the hurt will go away soon. Marcus looked around again, his eyes finding Daniel standing on the other side of his bed. Daddy? Why are you and Mommy both here? Elena and Daniel exchanged a look, and Elena nodded slightly. Because we both love you very much, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. And when someone we love is hurt, we want to be here to take care of them. Are you and Mommy friends again? Marcus asked with the directness that only children possessed. Yes, Daniel said without hesitation. Mommy and Daddy are friends again. Marcus smiled weakly, then looked toward the adjacent bed where Michael was still unconscious. Is Michael okay? Michael is sleeping, Elena explained. He got hurt too, but he's going to be fine. He just needs a little more time to wake up. As if summoned by his brother's concern, Michael's eyes began to flutter open. Elena moved to his bedside, her heart racing as she waited to see how extensive his neurological damage might be. Michael, Elena said softly. Can you hear Mommy? Michael's eyes opened fully, looking around the PICU with confusion but obvious awareness. When he saw Elena, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart soar. Mommy, Michael said, his speech slightly slurred but clearly understandable. Are you living with us now? Elena felt her breath catch at the innocent hope in her son's question. Mommy's going to be around a lot more, she said carefully. Daddy and I are going to take care of you together while you get better. Good, Michael said with satisfaction. I missed you. I missed you too, sweetheart, Elena replied, leaning down to kiss his forehead. More than you can possibly imagine. Dr. Rodriguez appeared at the foot of Michael's bed, having been monitoring both boys' awakening from the nurse's station. How are you feeling, Michael? Dr. Rodriguez asked, beginning the neurological assessment that would determine the extent of any permanent damage. Tired, Michael replied. And my head feels funny. Can you wiggle your fingers for me? Dr. Rodriguez asked. Michael raised his right hand and wiggled his fingers normally. When asked to do the same with his left hand, there was a noticeable delay and weakness, but he was able to complete the movement. Elena felt her heart sink slightly. The left side weakness confirmed that Michael had suffered some permanent damage to his motor cortex, but the fact that he had movement at all was encouraging. Can you tell me your name? Dr. Rodriguez continued. Michael Cross, he replied immediately. And how old are you? 6. Almost 7. Excellent, Dr. Rodriguez said, making notes on his chart. Michael, you're doing very well. The weakness in your left hand is going to get better with therapy and exercise. Elena felt relief flood through her. Michael was awake, alert, and himself. There would be challenges ahead, physical therapy and rehabilitation, but her son was going to recover. Dr. Cross, Dr. Rodriguez said quietly, drawing Elena aside. Both boys are exceeding expectations. Marcus shows no signs of neurological deficit, and Michael's impairments appear to be limited to fine motor skills on his left side. With aggressive therapy, he should regain most of his function. Thank you, Elena said, meaning it from the depths of her soul. Thank you for everything. Thank you for being the surgeon these boys needed, Dr. Rodriguez replied. There's no one else who could have given them this outcome. 2 weeks later, Elena sat in the family conference room at Children's Hospital, surrounded by lawyers, social workers, and child psychologists who were helping to restructure Marcus and Michael's custody arrangement. The boys had been discharged from the hospital 3 days earlier, both recovering remarkably well from their surgeries. The proposed joint custody agreement gives both parents equal time with the children, explained Margaret Stevens, the family court mediator who was facilitating the discussions. Alternating weeks, shared decision-making on all major issues, and flexibility for both parents' work schedules. That's acceptable to me, Elena said, reviewing the paperwork that would give her back equal access to her children's lives. And Mr. Cross? Margaret asked. More than acceptable, Daniel replied. It's what should have happened 3 years ago. The mediator made notes in her file. I have to say, it's unusual to see parents who went through such an acrimonious custody battle come back together so amicably. What changed? Elena and Daniel looked at each other, thinking about the terrible events that had led them to this moment. We remembered what really matters, Daniel said finally. We remembered that our children need both parents, and that being a good parent isn't about winning or losing custody battles. It's about loving your children enough to put their needs first. And sometimes, Elena added, it takes a crisis to show you what you really value. Our boys almost died, and facing that possibility made both of us realize that our fights with each other were hurting the people we love most. Margaret smiled. It's refreshing to see parents who can learn from their mistakes. The court will be very pleased to approve this arrangement. After the lawyers and mediators left, Elena and Daniel sat alone in the conference room, processing the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. How do you think the boys will handle the transition? Elena asked. I think they'll be thrilled, Daniel replied. Marcus asked me yesterday when you were coming to live with us. I had to explain that you wouldn't be living in the same house, but that they'd be spending equal time with both parents. How did he react? He said that was okay as long as you didn't disappear again, Daniel said quietly. Elena, they never stopped missing you. Even when I was telling myself that the custody arrangement was best for them, they were asking about you constantly. Elena felt the familiar ache of lost time. I can't get those 3 years back, Daniel. I missed so much of their lives. But you haven't missed their futures, Daniel said firmly. Elena, from now on, you're going to be part of every soccer game, every school play, every bedtime story. We're going to make sure that Marcus and Michael know they have two parents who love them and are committed to their happiness. What about us? Elena asked. As co-parents, I mean. We need to be able to communicate and cooperate without falling back into old patterns. We need to remember that we're on the same team now, Daniel said. Team Marcus and Michael. Whatever disagreements we have, whatever conflicts arise, we resolve them as partners who both want what's best for our children. Elena nodded. It's going to be an adjustment, learning to work together instead of against each other. We did it before, Daniel reminded her. When we were building our careers and raising babies together. We were a good team once. Before we forgot that success means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with, Elena said softly. I won't forget again, Daniel promised. Elena, I know I don't have the right to ask this, and I know it might be too much too soon, but I need you to know something. What? I never stopped loving you, Daniel said quietly. I was angry and hurt and prideful, but underneath all of that, I never stopped loving the woman who made me want to be better than I was. Elena looked at him, seeing not the enemy who had taken her children, but the man who had once been her best friend and greatest love. Daniel, we both made mistakes, Elena said carefully. We both chose our careers over our family in different ways. We both forgot that marriage requires compromise and sacrifice. If we're going to rebuild any kind of relationship beyond co-parenting, we need to be different people than we were. Are you willing to try? Daniel asked hopefully. I'm willing to see if we can be friends again, Elena said. If we can learn to trust each other again. If we can put Marcus and Michael first in everything we do. That's all I can ask for, Daniel said. And Elena, it's more than I deserve. It's what our children deserve, Elena corrected. They deserve parents who love each other, even if that love looks different than it used to. 6 months later. Elena stood on the sidelines of Marcus's soccer field, cheering as her son scored his first goal of the season. Beside her, Daniel hooped with pride, holding up his phone to record the moment for posterity. Did you see that footwork? Daniel said excitedly. He completely faked out the defender. He's been practicing, Elena replied with a smile. Every day after school during his week with me. The easy familiarity between them was still new, but it was growing stronger every week. They had learned to co-parent as allies instead of adversaries, supporting each other's time with the boys and communicating openly about challenges and successes. Mom, Dad, did you see my goal? Marcus called from the field during halftime. We saw it, Elena called back. Amazing footwork, sweetheart. On the bench beside them, Michael sat cheering for his brother while working on grip exercises with a stress ball. His left side weakness had improved dramatically with physical therapy, and his doctors were optimistic that he would eventually regain full function. How's the hand feeling today? Elena asked, sitting beside Michael. Better, Michael said, demonstrating his improved grip strength. Dr. Martinez says I might be able to play soccer again next season. That's wonderful news, Elena said, hugging her son close. But remember, even if soccer doesn't work out, there are lots of other things you're amazing at. I know, Michael said philosophically, but I really want to play with Marcus again. And you will, Daniel said, joining them on the bench. Your mother's right that there are lots of things you're good at, but with hard work and therapy, soccer is going to be one of them again. After the game, they went to their new Saturday tradition, family dinner at a restaurant where Marcus and Michael could choose the location. This week, they had picked a pizza place with arcade games, and Elena watched her sons play with the pure joy that only children could express. "They look happy," Daniel observed, joining Elena at their table while the boys played air hockey. "They are happy," Elena agreed. "Happier than I've seen them since the divorce." "Happier than I've seen them ever," Daniel corrected. "Elena, they have something now that they never had before. They have both parents present and engaged and working together. That's worth more than any custody arrangement could provide." Elena nodded, watching Marcus help Michael reach the controls on a game that was too tall for him. Her sons had not only survived their near drowning, but had emerged stronger and more resilient. Marcus was excelling in school and had shown no lasting effects from his brain injury. Michael was adapting to his physical challenges with determination and optimism. "I have something to tell you," Daniel said, his voice carrying a note of nervousness. "What is it?" "I've been offered the CEO position at a startup in San Francisco," Daniel said. "Incredible opportunity, basically a chance to build a new company from the ground up." Elena felt her stomach drop. "And you're considering it?" "I was," Daniel admitted. 3 years ago, I would have taken it without hesitation. But Elena, I can't leave Marcus and Michael. I can't disrupt their lives again just for my career advancement." Elena stared at him, amazed by the transformation in his priorities. "Daniel, you love building companies. It's what you're passionate about." "I'm passionate about being a father," Daniel corrected. "I'm passionate about being present for my children's lives. The startup will have to find someone else." "What if there was another way?" Elena asked carefully. "What do you mean?" Elena took a deep breath, preparing to make an offer that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. "What if we all went to San Francisco? Marcus and Michael could have a fresh start, and you could take your dream job." Daniel's eyes widened in shock. "Elena, you have your position at Children's Hospital. You've built your career here. And I can build a career in San Francisco too," Elena said firmly. "Daniel, 6 months ago we were enemies fighting over our children. Now we're partners working together for their happiness. Maybe it's time to take the next step. What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we move to San Francisco as a family," Elena said, her heart racing at the magnitude of what she was proposing. "Not as a married couple necessarily, but as co-parents who live close enough to share daily responsibilities. Marcus and Michael could go to the same school, have the same friends, maintain stability while we both pursue the opportunities we want." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. "Elena, that's a huge step. Living in the same city, coordinating our lives that closely. Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I'm sure I'm ready to put our children first," Elena replied. "And I'm sure that Marcus and Michael deserve to have both parents as active parts of their daily lives, not just weekend visitors." "What about us?" Daniel asked quietly. "Elena, spending that much time together, rebuilding our friendship while raising our children. Feelings might develop that complicate things." Elena looked at him, seeing the hope and uncertainty in his eyes. Over the past 6 months, she had watched Daniel transform from the driven businessman who had destroyed their family into a devoted father who put his children before everything else. She had seen him support her career, celebrate her successes, and treat her as an equal partner in parenting. "Maybe some complications are worth the risk," Elena said softly. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Daniel asked, hope evident in his voice. "I'm saying that I'm willing to see what happens when we stop fighting against each other and start building towards something together," Elena replied. "I'm saying that Marcus and Michael deserve parents who love each other, and maybe it's time to find out if we can love each other again too." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Elena Rodriguez Cross, will you move to San Francisco with me and see if we can build a family that's even better than the one we had before?" Elena looked toward the arcade where Marcus and Michael were playing together, her sons who had survived a near-death experience and taught their parents what really mattered in life. "Yes," she said, squeezing Daniel's hand. "Let's go build our family again." 1 year later, San Francisco. Dr. Elena Cross stood in the observation deck of San Francisco Children's Hospital, watching her surgical team prepare for a complex pediatric trauma case. She had been the chief of pediatric surgery for 6 months now, and had successfully saved dozens of children's lives while maintaining a schedule that allowed her to be present for Marcus and Michael's daily lives. "Dr. Cross," her surgical resident said, approaching with a patient chart, "the trauma case is ready for your assessment." "I'll be right there," Elena replied, checking her watch. It was 4:30 p.m., which meant she would be finished with surgery in time for Marcus's piano recital at 7 p.m. and Michael's soccer practice at 8 p.m. Also, the resident added with a smile, there are two young gentlemen in the family lounge asking when Dr. Mom will be done saving lives so they can go home for dinner. Elena laughed. Marcus and Michael had taken to spending their after-school hours at the hospital when they were with her, doing homework in her office and charming the nursing staff with their curiosity and energy. Tell them Dr. Mom will be done in 2 hours, Elena said. And remind them that they promised to finish their math homework before we leave. As Elena scrubbed for surgery, she reflected on the extraordinary year that had brought her family to this moment. The move to San Francisco had been challenging, but ultimately healing. Marcus and Michael were thriving in their new school, making friends, and excelling academically. Michael's physical therapy had been so successful that he was back to playing soccer, albeit with some accommodations for his left side weakness. Most importantly, Elena and Daniel had slowly rebuilt their relationship from co-parents to friends to something deeper and more mature than their first marriage had ever been. Elena, Daniel's voice came from behind her as she finished scrubbing. She turned to find her ex-husband, now boyfriend, standing in surgical scrubs with an expression of nervous excitement. Daniel, what are you doing here? Elena asked, surprised to see him at the hospital during his work hours. I wanted to ask you something before your surgery, Daniel said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. And I wanted our sons to be here when I asked. Elena's breath caught as Daniel dropped to one knee in the surgical prep area, holding out a ring that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. Elena Rodriguez Cross, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. You saved our children's lives with your hands, and you saved our family with your heart. You taught me that love isn't about controlling someone, it's about supporting them. You showed me that being a good parent means celebrating your partner's success, not competing with it. Will you marry me again? But this time as partners who understand what really matters. Elena stared at him, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. From bitter enemies fighting in court to co-parents learning to trust again to two people who had rediscovered why they fell in love in the first place. Yes, Elena said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I'll marry you again. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to kiss her as applause erupted from the surgical staff who had gathered to witness the proposal. Did she say yes? Came Marcus's voice from the doorway, where both boys stood with huge grins on their faces. She said yes. Daniel called back, lifting both sons into a group hug that included Elena. Are we going to be a real family again? Michael asked hopefully. We've been a real family for a long time, Elena said softly. But now we're going to be a family that lives in the same house and has the same last name and celebrates everything together. Good, Marcus said with satisfaction. I was getting tired of having 2 different bedrooms. And now Mommy won't have to leave when Daddy comes home, Michael added. Elena and Daniel looked at each other, understanding that their children's simple wisdom had guided them back to what they should have never lost in the first place. Dr. Cross, the surgical resident, interrupted gently. The trauma patient is stable, but they really need you in the OR. Go save another family, Daniel said, kissing Elena's forehead. We'll be right here waiting for you when you're done. Always, Elena replied, understanding that this time, she really was going to have everything. A career that saved children's lives, a family that supported her dreams, and a love that had been tested by the worst circumstances and emerged stronger than ever. As Elena headed into surgery to save another child's life, she reflected on the impossible journey that had brought her family back together. Marcus and Michael's near drowning had been the worst day of their lives, but it had also been the beginning of their healing. Sometimes the most devastating crisis became the greatest blessing. Sometimes losing everything was the only way to find what really mattered. And sometimes love really was strong enough to survive anything, even the people who thought they could destroy it. The surgeon who had been told she couldn't be both a doctor and a good mother had saved her children's lives and rebuilt her family's future. The woman who had lost custody of her sons had gained something even more precious, the knowledge that love, forgiveness, and second chances could heal wounds that seemed permanent. Elena Cross was living proof that the best mothers were often the ones who refused to accept limitations, who fought for what they believed in, and who loved their children enough to sacrifice everything for their happiness. If this story has shown you that forgiveness is the ultimate act of love, that crisis can reveal what really matters, and that families can heal from even the deepest wounds, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe to Lux Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth for more powerful stories about love, redemption, and the choices that define us. Remember, true strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, learning from your mistakes, and choosing love over pride every single time. Until next time, believe in second chances. Believe in the power of forgiveness. And always, always choose love.